Okay, so let's go ahead and start. Johnson, do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Hey, sure. Hi, everyone. Um, my name is Jiang Chong. I'm currently a PhD candidate in quantitative research methodology. I'm working on my dissertation now, and also I am the consultant for quantitative research methods working with payroll.
Mm-hmm.
So I will be introducing in our workshop, particular on the part of doing a research project using quantitative approach. Nice to meet you
Mm-hmm.
all.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I'm Peirong. I'm the qualitative research methodology consultant, and I'm also currently a PhD candidate at the qualitative and quantitative research methodology program at IU here. So later on, I will focus on the qualitative part and try to show and share with you some of the common research activities. Okay, let's get started here. So before we start, just a heads up that this is a more like an introductory level of workshop. So what we are going to offer is some of the overview for the basic qualitative and quantitative research methodologies or methods or activities. But however, these methods are, from our perspective, are the foundation to many of the advanced analytical methods or activities. So we basically all start from here and moving toward to our more like individualized needs. So at the end, we also will have a QA, like question and answer section. So if you have any your individual questions or needs, feel free to share with us and ask your question there. So first, let's start with a recap of what we've done in the last semester. So basically, our last semester, we start with helping you to explore your research area or interest. And this is usually being done through cross-taking or when you immerse with your colleagues or in the field. And then from there, since you have a very general and broad research interest, we then cover some of the tips to help you to narrow down your research topic to a more precise research question. So by doing this, you could do it through literature review or taking some minor courses or work with your colleagues and mentors, or you just directly engage in other research projects. So you could kind of learn the how to know-how skills from there. And then later we introduce the research design, but the key point is really to make sure your research design really tied to your research question. So whichever stage, we always encourage you to go back to your research question and think that, okay, is the activities or the methods that I'm using or well used can really gather the information that can helps my to answer my research question. So for these, we have the recording, as I said at the beginning, that we have our previous recording uploaded to our YouTube channel. So feel free to check out, and we also have the QR code here. So since we've kind of covered from research interest to research question to research design, today again we are going to introduce some of the popular or common research activity. So what we are going to do is we are going to propose a problem scenario, and each of us, for me, it's a qualitative research question. I'm going to hypothetically generate some qualitative research question. And then I'm going to show you how I start from this qualitative research question to choose the research methods I use. And I'm also going to really briefly talk about some of the basic concept or the techniques of those activity. So here is our problem scenario. In this study, we are exploring international students' educational experience in a predominantly white institution. So qualitatively, based on this really general problem statement, what I could ask a very general question is, what are international students' educational experience in a predominantly white institution in the United States? And so from there, I'm going to cover a few aspects by asking a more specific sub-question. So for example, I could ask specifically, how do international students interact with domestic faculty members and peers across different educational settings? And what are the challenges they face throughout their study, especially in relation to these interactions? So it's also connects a little bit to the first question, right? And then from there, I also want to understand, how do they navigate through these challenge? And specifically, I want to know, like, what are the support system and the resources are made available to them. So these kind of what, how, uh, kind of question are the kind of question we would ask in qualitative research. So here is a table. So I think this is kind of a pretty useful way to for any researcher to compare, especially when you're at your starting point as a researcher, to really visualize what your research question in relation to the information you need and the research activity. And even when in your later stage, when you're meeting with your advisor, you could even add on a column showing the summary of your result. And then from there, back and forth, you can see if these results really answer your research question. So I really like this kind of table. So start from here, let's say. So in general, a very broad question is, what are international students' education experience in a predominantly white institution in the United States? So the information I need, of course, is their education experience. And here I'm looking at across different educational settings, from the classroom interaction to the interaction outside the classroom, or even to with their interaction, like with the university system. So I designed these sub questions, and I feel like integratedly they could help me to answer this general big question. So for specifically the first question, their interactions with the domestic faculty members and peers. The information I need is a record that are able to demonstrate their interaction with the peers or faculty member. So one of the activity I could do is observation. So for example, you look at the observation. Oh, I see somebody sending me an email asking about the session, but I'm gonna have to, like, ignore that. I go back to that later. However, anyway, so observation. So you could set up an observation, observing their faculty meeting, or, like, advisor advisee meetings, when international students interacting with their advisor. And or you could set up observation when international students, they are taking classes, and see how their interactions with the instructor or their peers. So you could do observation and showing these records. And from there, not even say from there, you could alternatively take only interview, or you could combine observation to interview. So this interview, you could mostly ask, if you're only going to conduct interview, you can maybe ask, so share me a little bit about, your experience working with a domestic faculty member under, for example, a classroom setting, or in your mentor meetings, or like be specific here, right? And if you are using both observation and interview, then you could say, okay, I observe you in which day I noticed these happen. So I noticed you did this. Could you share a little bit with me, like what was in your mind during that time? So you are really connecting something you observed to your interview. So this also kind of generate information for you to understand their interactions. Um, and also you could collect artifacts. So you could maybe invite them to share the email records when they were writing back and forth with their faculty members, advisors, or local peers, and or their social media screenshots, so on and so forth. So these are some of the possibility to think about this. And for the second question, for example, the challenge they face, then of course I want to focus on the challenge. So these could be part of the interview when you are doing these integrated interview with them, following by the interactions. Then you may probably ask some follow-up question focusing on their challenge. So you could say, earlier you say that you tend to have these, for example, language difficulties when that you get nervous when working or meeting with the faculty members. Could you share a little bit about me with me about that? And then these again could connect to the question 3, like what are the sources they take on. So from there, you could ask. So earlier, you share with me these language challenges in general when you're working or interacting with the local peers. And so when that happens, what are the sources, if any, that you seek out or you have reached out to? So all these could kind of combine together. But again, with question 3, you could also collect the artifacts. So for example, if they have ever reached out to any um, service, they may have a record, they may have email record or official document record. So here's just a example of some of the very common qualitative activities. And so here I'm going to dive in a little bit further to the the techniques or the types of these activity. So for observation, there are two common types of observation. So one kind is non-participate observation. That in this kind, researchers are always act more objectively or as a passive observer. They always, for example, if you are in the McDonald's cafeteria or Starbucks, then you may probably be sitting at a corner and then trying to take down field notes and just see what happens there. So I consider this as a pretty good kind of observation, especially when you're not familiar with your field site. And the other one is participate observation. So this one could always be, or is really good to be used when you are planning to immerse or stay in your field site for a longer time, especially for ethnographic work. So in this case, you are also participating in any kind of the cultural or community events that happens. But at the same time, you are also observing and capturing what is happening there. And the benefit of this is because you are also engaged and participate as a community member. When you're trying to interpret what is happening, you could use more of the community's own language or perspective to interpret that instead of like writing and interpreting as a outsider researcher. So what do you need? Usually you will need a pen and paper or digital devices for your field notes and or for photo and video taking. Um, I previously have produced or recorded a short 20 minutes video about this, so you could refer that for more of the practical details. So interview. In terms of the interview, there are 3 very common types of interview. The first one is structured interview. So for this kind, you are almost always following what you have planned to ask. So you will have a preset list of questions, and then you basically just follow these questions most of the time. Instead, well, sometimes you may ask a little bit of the clarification question, but you are not going off of script too much. On the other hand, if you're doing semi-structured interview, you may have a couple of pre-decided questions. You may have a lead-up question, and you may have a couple of follow-up questions you plan to ask. However, for most of the time, you just follow what the participant said, and then just go with the flow. And if the timing and the flow is right, then you may probably ask the follow-up question you plan to ask. And the other one, which has been, which could often be used for narrative kind of inquiry, is the open-ended interview. So usually for these kind, you may probably have just a very couple of the general lead-off question. But most of the time you are being really open to whatever will happen there, and you ask clarification question but you are not trying to guide too much of the interview flow. So for doing the interview, of course, some people would use a video or audio recorder. Some people have discussed whether or not you should take notes. It really depends on you. But I myself, I feel like taking notes could kind of help me to really ask and decide a follow-up question and really tie that question to what the participant just say. But it really depends on your personal habits and how you see the flow goes, because sometimes when you are too immersed in taking notes, you may miss what the participant said or miss the eye context and the physical or body kind of relationship you are building with the participant. Anyway, so if you're interested in how to decide a research question and the techniques, I strongly suggest this chapter in Dr. Korsbacken's Critical Ethnography in Education Research book. It's really good. So artifacts, I've talked about artifacts earlier, that except for you collecting data, you could also collect these existing data as to show, first of all, understand how the personal and cultural values are being constructed and expressed through these artifacts. So for example, some people would paint, some people would write diaries. It's also a way for them to express their own personal beliefs and cultural values. And the other way, collecting these documents could also help to support and offer evidence, extra evidence to other information you collected in the field. For example, if you do interview and the interviewee they have mentioned these events or mentioned this occasion, and they have a document or they have a record for this, you could invite them to share that with you. Or if when you're doing observation, you notice they have created something, you could later ask if they could share that with you, or offer a scan or photocopy to you. So what can be included as artifact? It really involves a lot. So anything from the official documents, such as governmental document or institution documents, to any private artifacts, such as diaries, letters, paints, photos or email record, or even social media screenshot. Some people would say social media analysis is another kind of analysis. That it's true. You could also just merely analyze social media data, but that is also another scope of qualitative research. So we are not going to cover in this workshop today. However, if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out, or focus on social media and do some research there. So this is the qualitative part, and I'm gonna transition to Jiang.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Carol. So I'm going to continue with the quantitative approach. Imagine we are interested in the same kind of research scenario. So go back to what Carol just said. For example, if we're interested in exploring international students' educational experience in a predominantly white institution. I mean, this is a hypothetical research topic. You will have your own research concern, of course. But here I'm just demonstrating when situating with the same topic, but what are the difference and what you need to consider when you're approaching either from qualitative side or from quantitative side. So as a quantitative, to go with the quantitative, yes, thank you. To go with the quantitative approach, the focus of the question are slightly different from the qualitative way of asking questions. So from the quant side, the question will be more specific and usually will involve some hypothesis. Next page, please. For example, let's still continue with the question regarding its students' experience in a PWI institution. I listed 3 types of questions to be asked. For example, you can ask, is there any difference in educational experience between international and non-international students in this type of institution in the US? And another comparable question is the second one is there any difference in educational experience for international students in a PWI institution versus a non-PWI institution? So you will see the focus of the question slightly different. The first question focusing on the particular student group. Your primary interest will be international student versus non-international student. But the second question actually shifted the focus into the type of institution. So meaning the interest of your research actually lies in a particular institution type or a particular kind of institution, whether it's predominantly white or not. And a third question actually shifting to another to another domain of the topic is about the relationship. Is there any relationship between students' educational experience, their country of origin, and the institution characteristic? So actually, we are combining all these three features under one umbrella, but we would rather to examine the relationship, consider you have different different student characteristics regarding their backgrounds and also the institution type. So this is kind of simple demonstration telling you, what do you think? What do you need to think about when you use quantitative methods? So the first question is, can your research question or the variables associated with your research question, can that be quantifiable? So meaning, can you in some way measure the interest of your study to reflect it in a numerical way? And if yes, how do you plan to quantify it? And what is the rationale? For example, people can use either some second-hand instrument, or you can simply develop a survey from your own end to serve your research purpose. And you can collect your data to select your target, the target population of your study, and distribute your survey and collect your data, and then do some, stats or scoring so that you can quantify these variables. But doing that, you do need to have a concrete rationale. For example, why I need to use this particular instrument, and or why I would rather develop a survey on my own, and why I'm stating or including this particular question in my survey, and it has to be scored in this particular way. So there are a lot of decisions to be made in terms of how and why to quantify your variables. So after quantify your variables, you end up with a data, a quantitative data that can be analyzed using some stats, simple or advanced stats method. So the two fundamental questions that can be answered using quantitative methods, like two main domain are, is there any difference? And is there any relationship? So these are like, think about, there are tons of extended questions, but they kind of extended in different way based on whether you're looking for any differences or you're looking for any potential relationship between the target of your study. So some basic methods involved. For example, if you hope to examine any of the differences, either between two groups or two time points, or regarding two different conditions. So some popular method you'll probably be very familiar with will be the t-test and ANOVA. So these are technically the stats method you can use to answer a question about, is there a difference between A and B or X and Y? And on the other side, if you want to examine if there exists a relationship between X, Y, and Z, obviously we approach using correlation analysis or test of independence. Actually, they're the same, because when you test of independence and you reject you have a result, to reject of the independence, actually you're kind of justify for potential relationship or correlation, right? And also there are some advanced methods, I mean, beyond the simple t-test and novel or correlation study, of course. Depending on the complexity of your research question and the structure of your data. So the advanced methods, I mean, they can't ultimately answer the same type of question, but they incorporate more considerations in terms of method selection and modeling, just because we need to, in selection and implement a particular method, we need to also incorporate the complexity of your research question and also the complexity of your data. So for example, you will see people use various type of regression models. It can be simple regression, multiple regression. Do you want some type of interactions? Do you want to include some polynomial terms so that to account for a nonlinear relationship potentially? And also factor analysis is very common if you want to identify some hidden patterns in your data. And also we have structural equation modeling, which is very commonly used in social science to identify the causal implication among some observed and unobserved variables. And also multi-level models account for the nested data structure. The longitudinal model obviously is account for some trend across time. So there are so many different types of methods. And to answer the same fundamental question of finding a difference or a relationship, but you need to make your decision. Well, first you need to have a clear understanding of your research question, express your research question explicitly to account for the particular detail of the focus of your study. Also, you need to know your data very well so that you do know which are some of the candidate methods that you can use to address the particular very unique characteristic of your data. So these are some of the common considerations you want to think about when you want to go through a quantitative approach to answer your research question. I think these are some very general overview. And right now we are open to some questions. It can be questions regarding what we have introduced from the PowerPoint. And also it can be any method relevant questions, but about your own research project. Thank you.